jasho letu.
Today, as we know, we're here because we wish to release the National Torture Survey Report. And as a matter of fact, you know, the Independent Medical Legal Unit as an organization, non-governmental organization, that is concerned about the rights of citizens, and we are keen on matters of torture and extrajudicial executions. We also provide counseling to victims of torture and families, and our mandate is that broad. We shall have the presentation of the report by the Executive Director of the Independent Medical Legal Unit, IMLU, Mr. Peter Kiama.
This to us is a very, very special occasion as the Independent Medical Legal Unit, as well as our partners, the International Commission of Jurists, Kenya chapter. We have carried out a project on human rights, especially addressing the issue of torture for the last 2 years through a grant provided by the European Union. And this actually is the last activity under that grant. And the activity was to help us be able to move to the next level of our interventions. The national survey that was carried out across the country in the month of May and June 2011 indicates that 23% of Kenyans have experienced torture. And just to mention that this survey was actually not carried out by us, an ICJ. We commissioned an experienced research firm, that is TNS RMS, and 61% think that torture is very common in this country. The type of torture suffered are as follows. 72% indicate that they have been harassed, 53% intimidated, 47% physical infliction of pain, 38% forced to accept a crime they did not commit. Only 25% of these made a formal report or a formal complaint to a government official, either a police station or to the local chief or any other person in authority. 77% of the cases indicate that no action was taken when they made a report on torture. And out of the 23% of cases where people said, well, yeah, some action was taken, only 3% expressed complete satisfaction with the actions taken when they reported. Again, 48% of those who have reported cases of torture reported to the police station. So the police station would be the first point of call for many Kenyans when they are tortured. That 7% indicate that they reported to the area chief. Of course, the chief remains, an authority in the village. Now, other places where people reported were only were below 10%. We also asked why 75% of Kenyans who suffer torture never report these cases, and 42% said they don't believe any action will be taken, so why report? So out of upper there, that 5% were afraid of reprisal, and fear was a key factor in terms of acting on torture. That 2% felt they need money to get justice. 17% said they do not know where to report. So we still have a good percent of Kenyans who don't know where to report when they are violated. Out of those who said they have actually suffered torture, 59% of the victims have been tortured by the regular police. And 42% would have been tortured at police stations, and 10% on the way to the police station after arrest, what we call the pre-trial process. The forms of torture suffered. The survey indicates that torture is becoming more psychological than physical. And you can see there, intimidation, threat of injury to the victim or a family, forcing victim to make impossible choices, abuse, and humiliation. And as you all know, torture hits at the center of the dignity of the human person. So we cannot ignore psychological torture, even though it's not physical. But we do have, at IMLU, we do have experienced counselors who are able to identify that level of trauma suffered out of torture. So we are able to identify that, yes, people have suffered psychological torture through the experts that we work with. The other forms of torture were physical. One, whipping. Two, burning with cigarettes. Three, beating with gun butts and wooden clubs. Forced disappearance, that is emerging as a grave violation there because even bodies are never recovered. Blackmail and extortion. I would like to underline extortion because, as you'll see in the next few slides, there's a link between torture and poverty. There's a link between torture and economic survival. The key perpetrators, as earlier mentioned there, the molecular police emerged tops at 59%, then followed by vigilante groups at 9%, 7% administration police, 5% the local chief, 4% council askaris. As you can see, all these are, people who are in charge of law enforcement. And they're the ones who come, who interact with the citizens on a very regular basis. The factors driving torture, as I mentioned, when we interviewed Kenyans across the country, poverty emerged as the key driver of torture. Actually, most of those tortured, who reported having been tortured, are people who are actually surviving, just surviving, as you say. We say in Nairobi, hustling. So it's a situation where we find that people are being asked to pay protection fee. If you don't, you are tortured or you are shot dead. 43% reported that another key driver of torture is weak enforcement of legislation. 42% lack of awareness. 32% said perpetrators do not know, have very minimal understanding about human rights. And 34% indicated inadequate legislation. Yes, there is a legislation, but it's inadequate. As you all know, up to today as we speak, there's no law in Kenya that clearly prohibits torture. There's no law passed by our parliament that clearly prohibits torture. And just to acknowledge that the efforts of these three institutions towards this survey, the staff of the Independent Medical Legal Unit, all of them, including program staff, our board, as well as the admin staff, who ensure that we had, the oil that, would help us to move forward. I can see Wycliffe smiling there. And also, of course, our partners in this project, the International Commission of Jurists, who worked with us throughout the 2 years to see that this project was properly implemented.
Kupigwa na kupokonywa maisha hakutatuzuia sisi wananchi kunyakua uhuru wetu na haki ya jasho letu na haki ya jasho letu. Tumeka